If your energy is flat, your weight won't budge, or your mood feels muted, don't blame yourself first. It might be what you're eating. Stop eating these foods now. They may be silently destroying your thyroid. The thyroid is small, but it runs far more of your life than most people realize. It sets the pace for your metabolism, coordinates temperature, influences mood, and helps determine how your body uses calories. When it's off, you feel it everywhere. That's why in the next few minutes I'm going to walk you through 10 everyday things, grouped by how they damage the gland, so you know not just what to avoid, but why, and what to do instead. If you care about your metabolism and energy, subscribe now. This channel breaks down the science in clear steps. Think of the thyroid like your body's thermostat and gas pedal combined. The hypothalamus and pituitary are the control center. They send thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH, to tell the thyroid to make hormone. The thyroid mainly produces T4, the less active form. Most T4 is converted later into T3 by tissues like the liver, gut, and muscles. T3 is the key that fits into receptors in every cell and tells them to speed up or slow down. Damage can happen at many points. Damage the gland itself, block hormone production, interfere with conversion, or prevent T3 from working in the cell. That's why someone can have a normal TSH yet still feel hypothyroid, because the problem can be at the conversion step, at antibody-mediated damage, or at the receptor level. 2 quick images to keep in mind as we go through these foods. First, the canary in a coal mine metaphor. The thyroid often behaves like an early warning system. Small exposures show up there before they show up elsewhere. Second, the bus seats metaphor for molecular competition. Many chemicals look enough like iodine or other molecules that they try to sit in the same transporter or receptor seat your thyroid needs. When that happens, the real passenger, iodine or hormone, can't get on board. We'll group the 10 items into 3 mechanism-driven categories, so the what and the why match up. 1. Foods and exposures that can directly destroy thyroid tissue. 2. Items that mainly block function or compete with essential steps. And 3. Those with combined or context-dependent effects that can both damage and block. I'll explain a one-line mechanism for each item, give concrete examples you'll recognize, rate the degree of risk in everyday life, and tell you a simple mitigation you can start tonight. Group 1. Directly destructive to thyroid tissue. These are things that, by one mechanism or another, can injure the thyroid itself or trigger the immune system to attack it. 1. Gluten and related proteins. Why it matters. In susceptible people, parts of gluten, particularly gliadin, can resemble thyroid structures enough to provoke an immune response that mistakenly targets thyroid tissue. The immune system learns to attack a foreign protein, but if that foreign protein looks like thyroid peroxidase, TPO, or thyroglobulin, the antibodies can cross-react. This molecular mimicry is one plausible mechanism linking gluten sensitivity and autoimmune thyroiditis in observational studies. Everyday examples: bread, pasta, pastries, many processed foods and sauces with wheat-containing thickeners. Degree of risk: highest for people with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and for those with existing anti-TPO or anti-TG antibodies. Lower but not zero for the general population. What to do tonight? Consider reducing or eliminating gluten while you test and evaluate. If you have known thyroid antibodies, discuss a trial of gluten reduction with your clinician and check anti-TPO and anti-TG levels before and after a monitored trial. Swap to naturally gluten-free whole foods, rice, quinoa, potatoes, and legumes, rather than processed gluten-free substitutes that are often high in sugar and seed oils. Why this matters clinically. For some people, removing gluten can lower antibody levels over months. For others, it makes no detectable difference. Evidence is mixed but consistent enough to justify cautious trials in antibody-positive patients. Mini hook. Number 2 is socially acceptable. Some even praise it as a stress buster, but chronic use quietly erodes crucial minerals and damages thyroid cells. 2. Alcohol. Chronic heavy intake. Why it matters. Alcohol can be directly toxic to thyroid follicular cells in experimental settings. It also suppresses TSH release from the pituitary, depletes minerals like zinc and selenium that the thyroid needs, impairs liver function, which reduces T4-T3 conversion, and increases gut permeability, the gateway to immune activation and autoimmunity. A few nights of moderate drinking won't cause lasting harm for most people, but regular heavy use creates a biological environment hostile to healthy thyroid function. Everyday examples: frequent nights out, daily wine with dinner, habitual high-volume drinking. Degree of risk. Dose-dependent. Occasional moderate consumption has smaller effects. Chronic heavy use is the major concern. What to do tonight? If you drink heavily, plan for reduction. Even short-term abstinence can restore mineral balance and improve sleep and liver function, two things that support thyroid conversion. For social drinkers, prioritize moderation and avoid drinking on empty stomachs. Discuss patterns with your provider. Don't stop medication or medical therapy without consulting them. Mini hook. Number 3 is almost invisible. It's in household plastics, in non-stick pans, and in pesticides. Yet some of these compounds act like endocrine wrecking balls. 3. Organochlorines and other persistent endocrine disruptors, BPA analogs, PCBs, certain pesticide residues, and artificial sweetener examples. Why it matters. A group of industrial and agricultural chemicals, including some organochlorine pesticides, PCBs, and certain plastic additives, bind to hormone transporters, alter receptor signaling, and increase systemic inflammation. Some of these chemicals accumulate in fat and persist in the body for years. They can interfere with thyroid hormone transport in the bloodstream, block receptor action, and contribute to oxidative stress that injures the gland. As an illustrative example, not a definitive accusation, some artificial sweetener compounds and plasticizers have been studied for endocrine activity. The take-home is that man-made, persistent compounds often interfere with hormonal balance. Everyday examples: non-organic produce with high pesticide residues, old or badly labeled plastics, canned foods with epoxy linings, burned or non-stick cookware with polymer residues, and certain packaged processed foods. Degree of risk. These chemicals are widespread and chronic, so even low-level exposures can add up. Risk is higher where storage and heating in plastics are common, and where non-organic foods are consumed frequently. What to do tonight? Reduce exposure by choosing organic produce for the highest residue items, the dirty dozen. Avoid microwaving or heating food in plastic, prefer glass and stainless containers, and limit consumption of heavily processed packaged foods. When possible, rinse and peel produce that's non-organic. The cumulative effect matters. Lowering multiple small exposures can meaningfully reduce total body burden. Mini hook. Now that we've covered the direct tissue damagers, we move into the sneaky stuff, the things that don't necessarily destroy your gland outright, but sit in the way of its work. Group 2. Primarily function blocking. This set interferes with essential steps: iodine uptake, conversion, cellular signaling, without necessarily destroying thyroid tissue outright. They're often more subtle, and because they're common in modern life, their cumulative effect can be large. 4. Fluoride and chlorine in drinking water. Why it matters. Fluoride and chlorine are halogens, chemically related to iodine, and they can compete at the sodium iodide symporter, NIS, the transporter that shuttles iodine into thyroid cells. If those seats are taken by other halogens, less iodine gets in, and the gland can't make hormone effectively. Fluoride may also promote oxidative stress in thyroid tissue and has been associated in some observational studies with altered thyroid function, particularly when iodine intake is low. Everyday examples: public water supplies with fluoridation, tap water treated with chlorine, some bottled waters without filtration. Degree of risk. For most people with adequate iodine nutrition, low levels of fluoride and chlorine are unlikely to be catastrophic. But in populations with marginal iodine status or high cumulative halogen exposure, this competition can matter. What to do tonight? If you suspect high exposure, use a carbon plus reverse osmosis or activated alumina filter for drinking and cooking water, or choose filtered bottled water from reputable sources. Be cautious about stacking iodine sources. Don't take huge iodine supplements on top of high halogen exposure, and consult a clinician before changing supplementation. Mini hook. Bromide isn't on your grocery list, but it's in the food supply, and it plays the same bus seat game against iodine. 5. Bromide and brominated compounds. Why it matters. Bromide atoms can sit in the same binding sites where iodine needs to be. Bromide accumulates in the body because it's processed differently, and once inside, it can impair iodine uptake and be stubborn to eliminate. Sources of bromide include some baked goods, where certain brominated dough conditioners have been used historically, flame retardants, and certain agricultural chemicals. Everyday examples: some processed breads and baked goods, environments with historic industrial contamination, older consumer products with brominated flame retardants. Degree of risk. Not everyone is exposed equally. Bromide accumulation is more likely in populations consuming large amounts of processed baked goods or living in contaminated areas. Still, it's common enough to warrant attention when trying to optimize thyroid function. What to do tonight? Reduce reliance on processed breads and baked goods. Choose minimally processed or homemade baked items when possible. Favor whole, real food carbohydrate sources. If you live in an industrial area or have concerns about contamination, talk to an environmental health clinician. Mini hook. The next one is often sold as heart healthy or low fat, but refined industrial seed oils behave differently once they're processed and heated. 6. Industrial seed vegetable oils, highly processed omega-6 oils. Why it matters. Modern seed oils, corn, soybean, sunflower, cottonseed, safflower, and others, are high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs. When these oils are industrially processed and repeatedly heated, they oxidize and form lipid oxidation products that increase systemic oxidative stress. Oxidative stress can impair deiodinase enzymes that convert T4 to active T3, and it can alter cell membrane composition, which affects hormone receptor function. High dietary omega-6 relative to omega-3 may also promote a pro-inflammatory milieu, interfering with thyroid signaling. Everyday examples: restaurant frying oils, many packaged snack foods, margarine, and vegetable oil labeled products. Degree of risk. Pretty high as a population-level exposure, because these oils are ubiquitous in processed foods and takeout. Occasional use is not the same as daily heavy intake. What to do tonight? Swap out highly processed seed oils for more stable fats in cooking. Extra virgin olive oil for medium heat, avocado oil for higher heat when appropriate, and small amounts of butter or ghee when you tolerate dairy. Reduce packaged and fried foods. Cook more at home with whole ingredients. Prioritize foods rich in omega-3s, fatty fish, walnuts, flaxseed, if you have no contraindications. Mini hook. This next one is often invisible because it's hiding in sweets and refined starches, but it's a major disruptor of the conversion machinery. 7. Sugar and refined carbohydrates. Why it matters. Diets high in refined carbohydrates and sugar drive repeated spikes in insulin and cortisol. Chronically elevated cortisol suppresses the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis and can blunt TSH response. Insulin resistance and fatty liver reduce the liver's ability to convert T4 into T3, and high sugar diets promote inflammation and gut dysbiosis, both pathways that can impair thyroid function. In short, sugar doesn't directly poison the gland in the way a toxin does, but it undermines the physiological processes that produce active thyroid hormone and keep tissue responsive to it. Everyday examples: sugary beverages, sweets, white bread, pastries, many low-fat processed foods that compensate with sugar. Degree of risk. Very common. Even moderate overconsumption over months can shift metabolic set points and reduce T4-T3 conversion. What to do tonight? Reduce refined carbs and added sugar. Focus on regular meals with protein, fiber, and healthy fats to stabilize blood sugar. Improve sleep and reduce chronic stress, because those amplify the metabolic disruption that impairs conversion. At this point, we've covered 7 of the 10 biggest suspects organized by the mechanism they use. Some directly injure thyroid tissue, others block the essential steps the gland needs to produce and activate hormone. Notice a pattern. Many of these exposures don't act alone. A person who eats a processed diet high in seed oils and refined carbs, drinks regularly, heats food in plastic, and consumes non-organic produce is stacking a lot of low-level insults. Those insults compound. Oxidative stress plus mineral depletion plus halogen competition plus immune activation is what creates a perfect storm for thyroid dysfunction. You may be wondering, how quickly do these effects show up, and will removing one thing make a difference? The timing is variable. For immune-mediated processes, antibody levels and symptoms can change over months. For functional disruptions, like blood sugar-driven conversion issues or acute toxin exposure, improvements can happen in days to weeks after dietary changes and better sleep. Because of that variability, action at multiple fronts is the smartest approach. Reduce exposures, support metabolic balance, and measure what's actually happening in your blood. Before we move to the last group, 3 items that have combined or context-dependent effects and often create the most confusion, let's pause and give you clear, actionable swaps for what we've already covered. These are modest, evidence-informed changes you can implement right away and that address the common mechanisms described. Practical swaps to start tonight. Reduce gluten-containing processed foods. Replace with naturally gluten-free whole foods like rice, beans, potatoes, and vegetables. If you already have thyroid antibodies, consider discussing a monitored gluten elimination trial with your clinician. Cut back on alcohol, especially nightly drinking or binge patterns. Even short-term reduction supports conversion and mineral recovery. Prioritize organic for the highest residue produce, the dirty dozen, and rinse non-organic items. Avoid storing or heating food in plastic. Move to glass or stainless where practical. Install or use filtered water for drinking and cooking if your local supply has significant fluoride or chlorine. A steady reduction in halogen load reduces competitive inhibition at the iodine transporter. Swap industrial seed oils for stable fats, olive oil, avocado, butter, ghee in moderation, and reduce fried and packaged foods. Reduce added sugars and refined starches. Eat balanced meals with protein, fiber, and fats to stabilize blood sugar. These swaps target the mechanisms we covered, reducing immune triggers, limiting direct tissue toxins, lowering halogen competition, cutting oxidative and inflammatory stress, and restoring the metabolic environment for better T4-T3 conversion. They don't promise a cure. No reasonable clinician would make that guarantee, but they significantly reduce the exposure load that could be working against your thyroid. Mini hook. The final 3 items are trickier because they can be protective in one context and harmful in another. Cooking changes them, nutrient status changes the effect, and how you prepare them matters. Up next are goitrogenic vegetables, soy, and high iodine loads. Each can be beneficial or harmful depending on context, and together they often decide whether someone tips into symptomatic hypothyroidism. But before we move on, a quick practical caution I can't stress enough. Do not stop or alter prescribed thyroid medication without talking to your clinician. If you're on levothyroxine or another thyroid medication, these dietary changes can alter absorption and metabolic demand. Let your provider guide medication adjustments based on labs and symptoms. What we're doing right now is reducing exposures and optimizing physiology so that when your next lab panel is checked, it tells a clearer story. Now, I'm going to walk you through the 3 remaining items, how they act like a double-edged sword, what cooking does to them, and the exact mitigation steps that make them safe or unsafe in real life. You'll want to hear this because many well-meaning guidelines treat these foods in black and white terms. The truth is more nuanced, and the nuance matters if you're trying to protect a vulnerable thyroid. Let's finish the last 3 items, the ones that can help you or hurt you depending on context, and then pull it all together into a practical plan you can start tonight. Goitrogenic cruciferous vegetables. Why it matters. Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, cauliflower, bok choy, contain naturally occurring compounds that, when raw, can break down into substances, commonly called goitrogens, that mildly interfere with thyroid peroxidase, TPO activity, and with iodine utilization in the gland. In plain terms, in someone who is already low in iodine, or who has an active autoimmune response against the thyroid, eating a lot of these raw can modestly reduce the gland's ability to make hormone. But context matters. Cooking destroys much of the goitrogenic activity, and these vegetables also provide fiber, vitamins, and beneficial phytochemicals. Everyday examples: raw kale salads, large smoothies with raw crucifers, uncooked cabbage slaws, and massive daily intakes of raw broccoli or kale chips as a health habit. Degree of risk. For most people with adequate iodine intake and no significant thyroid antibodies, crucifers are safe and healthful. The risk becomes meaningful mainly when iodine is marginal or when intake is extremely high and raw. What to do tonight? Cook your crucifers. Light steaming, roasting, or sautéing neutralizes most of the goitrogenic activity. Don't panic and toss all greens. Use them cooked more often if you have thyroid concerns, and ensure you're not simultaneously stripping iodine from your diet. For example, by avoiding iodized salt in seafoods entirely. If you have known hypothyroidism or positive anti-TPO, anti-TG antibodies, discuss dietary patterns with your clinician. A practical approach is to moderate raw crucifer intake rather than eliminate nutrient-dense vegetables altogether. Mini hook. The next item, soy, has been debated in the textbooks for decades. It can be both a food and a pharmaceutical, depending on how it's processed. Soy and concentrated soy isolates. Why it matters. Soy contains isoflavones, plant compounds like genistein and diazine that can affect thyroid biochemistry in several ways. In laboratory and animal studies, these isoflavones can inhibit thyroid peroxidase and modestly reduce thyroid hormone synthesis, especially when iodine is low. Fermented soy foods traditionally consumed in moderation, miso, tempeh, natto, behave differently than highly processed soy isolates used as protein, concentrates, or textured vegetable proteins. The isolates concentrate the isoflavones and remove much of the fiber and other balancing nutrients, essentially turning whole soy into a concentrated thyroid-interacting product. Infant soy formula, where it becomes a primary nutrition source for a developing thyroid, has been a particular area of caution historically. Everyday examples: highly processed soy protein bars, some vegan meat substitutes, many powdered protein blends featuring soy isolate, and soy infant formulas, which parents should discuss with pediatricians. Degree of risk: moderate to high with concentrated exposures, regular consumption of isolated soy proteins, or large amounts of processed soy. Low to minimal with occasional consumption of fermented or whole soy foods, and lower still when iodine status is adequate. What to do tonight? Avoid concentrated soy isolates and heavily processed soy products. If you use soy, choose traditionally fermented forms in moderation and balance them with other protein sources. If you're on levothyroxine, be aware that very high soy intake can affect absorption. Don't change medication without your clinician's guidance, but consider timing and total daily soy intake when you discuss labs. For infants and pregnant people, any decision around soy formula or high soy diets is best made with pediatric and obstetric guidance. Mini hook. The last item is counterintuitive, something often promoted as governing thyroid health, and yet too much can flip a healthy gland into suppression. Excessive iodine, including kelp and concentrated seaweed supplements. Why it matters. Iodine is essential for thyroid hormone production. No iodine, no hormones. But the relationship is not linear. The thyroid has an autoregulatory response. A sudden, very large iodine load can temporarily shut down hormone production, a phenomenon known as the Wolff-Chaikoff effect. In some people, especially those with autoimmune thyroid disease, large or sudden iodine doses can provoke or worsen hypothyroidism. Sources of high iodine include strong kelp supplements, concentrated seaweed pills, certain cough syrups or topical antiseptics, and repeat iodinated radiologic contrast exposures. Everyday examples: daily kelp capsules marketed for thyroid support, consuming multiple seaweed snacks or plates of dulse, shish kelp daily, and unmonitored use of iodine-containing supplements stacked on top of a diet that already includes iodized salt and seafood. Degree of risk. Risk increases with very large or abrupt intake. Moderate dietary iodine from dairy, iodized salt, and seafood is usually safe and necessary for most people. Problems arise when supplementation is excessive or when iodine is added to a background of autoimmune vulnerability. What to do tonight? Don't stack iodine sources. If you're taking kelp supplements or using high iodine products daily, pause and discuss with your clinician before continuing. Avoid megadoses of iodine in supplement form without medical supervision. If you have a history of autoimmune thyroid disease, be especially cautious about beginning new iodine-containing regimens and have your antibody and thyroid hormone levels checked by a provider who understands this nuance. Putting the three tricky items in context. These three, crucifers, soy, and iodine, are where nuance matters most. Each can be helpful or harmful depending on dose, preparation, and the person's baseline iodine status and immune state. Cooking, moderation, and avoiding concentrated or supplemental overload make the big difference. In other words, food context and pattern shape risk much more than single exposures in isolation. How these 10 items interact. The perfect storm revisited. We've now walked through all 10 suspects and the mechanisms they use: direct tissue damage, function-blocking competition, and mixed, context-dependent effects. It's worth pausing to map how they commonly converge in real life. Consider a typical modern pattern: frequent takeout fried in seed oils, a daily low-cost processed bar with soy isolate, non-organic produce, nightly wine, and drinking from plastic bottles, while relying on iodized salt sporadically. Individually, none of these may cause overt disease. Together, though, they create stacked vulnerabilities. Oxidative stress from oxidized oils and persistent pollutants, mineral depletion from alcohol and poor diet, zinc, selenium, magnesium, halogen competition from fluoride and bromide, immune triggers from gluten or gut permeability, and conversion impairment from fatty liver and insulin resistance. The thyroid, the canary in the coal mine, often signals first because it is highly sensitive to changes in nutrient supply, toxin exposure, and inflammation. This is why many people report normal TSH but ongoing fatigue, weight trouble, or brain fog. Lab tests that look only at the pituitary's signal miss problems downstream. Poor conversion in the liver, nutrient-limited deiodinase activity, or receptor-level resistance in tissues. So you can feel hypothyroid without a clear TSH alarm, and that's exactly why a more complete approach matters. Micronutrients and processes that support the thyroid's resilience. A few nutrients and physiologic processes come up repeatedly in the mechanisms we discussed, and they're worth naming because addressing them is part of reducing risk. Again, without dosing or prescriptive claims. Selenium is critical for selenoproteins that protect the gland from oxidative damage and for deiodinase enzymes that convert T4 to T3. Zinc and magnesium support hormone synthesis and cellular responsiveness and are commonly depleted by alcohol, poor diet, and chronic stress. Adequate protein and iron status support, thyroid hormone transport and metabolism. Liver health matters because the liver performs a large share of T4-T3 conversion. Fatty liver reduces conversion efficiency. Gut integrity matters because increased permeability can promote autoimmune activation by allowing antigens to stimulate the immune system. What to consider discussing with your clinician. Educational list, not medical advice. Assessment of selenium, zinc, and ferritin, shock iron status as part of a broader metabolic evaluation. Strategies to improve liver health, reduce refined carbs and alcohol, increase physical activity to improve conversion, and measures to support gut health through whole foods, fiber, and addressing dysbiosis when appropriate. All nutrient and supplement decisions should be individualized and supervised by a clinician. Testing guidance, what to ask for, and why. If you suspect your thyroid is being quietly sabotaged, a fuller lab panel gives a clearer picture than TSH alone. Again, this is education, not a directive to self-manage. Discuss these options with a healthcare provider who can interpret them in context. TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone. The pituitary signal to the thyroid. It tells you whether the control center thinks the body needs more or less hormone, but it doesn't reveal conversion problems or tissue resistance. Free. T4. The unbound form of the main thyroid hormone made by the gland. Low-free T4 suggests the gland isn't producing enough hormone. High can suggest over-replacement or other dynamics. Free. T3. The active hormone at the cellular level. Low-free T3 with normal TSH and free T4 suggests impaired conversion from T4 to T3 or increased conversion to inactive forms. Reverse T3. An inactive form made when the body is under stress, illness, or starvation. High reverse T3, alongside low-free T3, can indicate that the body is shunting hormone into an inactive form, useful in complex cases but not always necessary for routine testing. Anti-TPO and anti-thyroglobulin, anti-TG, antibodies. These indicate autoimmune thyroid disease. A detectable antibody response shifts management and dietary considerations, such as trials of gluten reduction and cautious iodine strategies, because autoimmunity is an immune, not just a hormonal, problem. Additional useful labs in context: ferritin, iron stores, vitamin D, fasting glucose or HbA1c, liver enzymes, and a basic metabolic panel. These are especially informative when evaluating conversion issues, fatigue, or weight resistance because they help identify contributing metabolic or nutrient problems. How to approach testing practically. Timing relative to medication. If you take levothyroxine or other thyroid medication, coordinate testing with your clinician. It matters for interpretation, but do not stop medication without medical guidance. Bring your labs to a knowledgeable clinician. Lab values are only meaningful when interpreted against symptoms, medication history, and potential exposures. A provider familiar with functional and conventional endocrinology can help map the next steps. Expect a timeline. Antibodies don't fall overnight. For immune-driven processes, meaningful change may take months. For conversion-related improvements, you might see lab and symptom shifts in weeks with metabolic and dietary changes. A practical, step-by-step plan you can start tonight. You don't need to overhaul your life all at once. Small targeted changes reduce exposure load quickly and stack into meaningful improvements. Think of this as turning down the volume on multiple stressors rather than searching for a single cure. Immediate swaps tonight. Reduce or avoid the highest risk items we covered. Limit processed foods high in seed oils and soy isolates. Avoid heating, storing food in plastic. Reduce added sugars and refined grains. Cut back on nightly alcohol. And stop concentrated iodine supplements if you're taking them without supervision. Prioritize organic for the dirty dozen produce items. Rinse and peel non-organic when possible. Use glass or stainless for food storage and reheating. Don't microwave in plastics. Swap vegetable seed oils for olive oil, avocado oil, or stable fats appropriate to your cooking temperature. Cook cruciferous vegetables instead of eating them raw every day. Replace processed snacks and protein bars with whole food options. Nuts, yogurt, if tolerated, fruit with nut butter, or a simple meal with protein, vegetables, and healthy fat. If your water is fluoridated and you have high cumulative halogen exposure, consider filtered, carbon plus reverse osmosis if practical, drinking, cooking water, especially if iodine status is marginal. Track and reduce sugar and refined carb intake. Stabilize blood sugar with balanced meals that include protein and fiber. Short-term clinical steps, weeks to months. Request a full thyroid panel, TSH, free T4, free T3, anti-TPO, anti-TG, and relevant metabolic labs. Review results with a clinician. If antibodies are positive, discuss a monitored trial of gluten reduction and other immune-modulating lifestyle steps with your provider. Address sleep, stress, and activity. These non-diet factors strongly influence hormone conversion and immune balance. Evaluate alcohol patterns. Short periods of abstinence can reveal whether drinking has been a significant contributor. Longer-term habits. Prioritize whole foods over packaged ones. Cook more at home so you control fats and packaging. Maintain regular meals to stabilize cortisol and insulin rhythms. Work with your clinician to monitor labs and adjust interventions based on objective data and symptoms, not guesswork. How quickly will you notice change? Expect variability. For metabolic and conversion improvements, some people feel better in days to weeks when they cut sugar and seed oils and restore sleep. For antibody-driven autoimmunity, antibodies can take months to shift and symptom improvement may be gradual. The sensible approach is multi-pronged. Reduce exposures now, get the right tests, and use lab trends plus symptoms to guide next steps. Warnings, caveats, and things I must stress. Don't stop or alter prescribed thyroid medication without discussing it with your clinician. Dietary changes can alter hormone absorption and metabolic demand, and medication adjustments should be made under supervision. We're describing mechanisms and associations that are biologically plausible and supported by a body of observational and experimental work. Interpretations vary, and the science isn't always conclusive for every individual. Where controversy exists, err on the side of measured, evidence-informed changes rather than dramatic, unmonitored interventions. If you're pregnant, breastfeeding, or caring for small children, decisions about soy formula, iodine supplementation, or other changes should be made with your obstetrician or pediatrician. Final synthesis. What to take away? Your thyroid is small but extraordinarily sensitive, a kind of canary in the coal mine for metabolic and environmental stress. Many everyday foods and exposures can quietly add up. They deplete key minerals, compete with iodine at transporters, increase oxidative stress, alter conversion of T4 into T3, or provoke immune cross-reactivity. That list of 10 items, gluten, alcohol, organochlorines and persistent plastics, fluoride, chlorine, bromide, industrial seed oils, sugar and refined carbs, cruciferous vegetables, raw, soy isolates, and excessive iodine, captures common sources of those harms. The good news is that most of these are manageable through practical swaps. Choose whole foods, minimize processed seed oils, cook crucifers, avoid heating food in plastic, be cautious with concentrated soy and iodine supplements, reduce sugar and excess alcohol, and consider filtering your water if halogen exposure is a concern. Immediate action, plus proper testing. Clarity. Reduce exposures now, ask for a fuller thyroid panel, and work with a clinician to interpret results and guide safe changes. That combination reduces the noise so your labs tell a clearer story and your treatment decisions can be smarter. One last time, and with the nuance this topic demands, stop or significantly reduce the items on this list now, because evidence suggests they may be silently harming your thyroid, but do so in a measured way that includes proper testing and clinical oversight. Food and environment rarely act alone, they stack. Reducing the stack is the most reliable path to protecting that small gland that runs so much of your energy and mood. If this message spoke to you, subscribe and share this video so more people learn what to look for. Check the description for a simple checklist and for resources describing the full thyroid panel to discuss with your healthcare provider. And if you suspect you have thyroid trouble, get tested. Bring the results to a clinician who will interpret them in context and make changes under guidance. Don't guess with your medication or with high-dose supplements. Your thyroid is listening. Lower the background noise, restore the nutrients and reduce the exposures. Let the canary breathe again.